Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us. This is one of the series of interviews that I'm doing for the Future Social Service Institute for the Family Violence Leadership Intensives alumni. So really pleased that you could make the time to talk to me today.
Thank you. I love that I can be here, and I love the sessions you've done so far.
Thanks, Kate. So to introduce you to our audience, and I'm sure most of them will already know you, but Kate Jenkins is currently the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner. She's held that role since 2016. Prior to that, for 3 years, she was the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner. At that time, she has been the co-chair of the Victorian Commissioner's Disability Reference Group, a member of the Aboriginal Justice Forum, and has held numerous voluntary roles, including being on the boards of Berry Street Victoria, the Heidi Museum for Modern Art, and the Carlton Football Club. Prior to that, Kate spent 20 years of her career as the lead equal opportunity partner with Herbert Smith and Freehills. One of the things that Kate and I were just talking about, and that we have a number of things in common. I know Kate most from her time on the Berry Street board and her incredible passion for that organisation's work. But we also have a hidden passion for creative arts. One of the things that Kate just told me was that she was a first prize winner in the Royal Melbourne Show for spinning and weaving, and has a whole bunch of things hidden away in her home that demonstrate her commitment to art and creative arts. Nice thing to know, Kate.
Yes.
Amongst all your other many impressive talents. So, Kate, you've clearly had a long and deep commitment to diversity in all of the roles that you've played. I'm very curious to hear about your thinking about diversity and leadership. Why is it important? What does it look like? And how do we get there?
And I have been committed, and I feel like it was just something right from the start of my life. Diversity and different people. I must admit, always been fascinated by people with different experiences to me. So, when you ask that question, and I think, why did I start being interested? I grew up in an orchard, but on our orchard, which was mostly my family, it was also filled with Italian migrant workers. So I kind of had this where my family was around, the workers and all these migrants from the wharfs that my family brought home to pick fruit. So I think right from the start, I've had lots of different people around me. So part of it is just an incredibly, I'm passionate about it because I'm incredibly curious about people. And that background too is I'm definitely passionate about women, because from that, right from the start, I could see gender roles and it never made any sense. And in those, in the 70s, I have a really strong memory of the Deborah Wardley case where she wanted to fly with Ansett, and it was the first significant discrimination case. And I realised, because that was in 1979, I was 11 at the time, but it was like outrage from the start. So some of why I do this work is because it's just my sense of fairness and justice, and it's just not right. I think everyone is valuable. But as I've got into more leadership roles myself, and also worked particularly looking at more diversity and women in leadership, there's just no question that our decision making and our outcomes are far worse if you don't have broad experience, if you don't look at different data. So when, even in the current pandemic, we whilst I know there are some women holding premier roles, a lot of those first faces that we saw were men telling us how we were going to come through. And I give the federal and the state government credit, because they made a number of mistakes that really didn't work for women, and there was a quick return. So everyone's staying home, and there was absolutely, in family violence, then a very quick realisation that home wasn't safe for many women. So I often look and think, well, if we had both politically, organisationally, more diversity in those leadership roles, we wouldn't make the first mistake. And actually, we would get better decisions and have a better community. And I think that we keep ending up with the same types. We have to do things differently. But I do think that even from the 70s to now, people are much clearer. There is a lot more research on why, particularly women, how much that would add to our GDP in this current moment. If we know we can be more productive and, build our economy from more gender parity, then I think it's a really compelling argument. So I start off with a kind of a sense of outrage and injustice, but then I move to a sense of we will be better if we have more diversity in leadership. And I do reiterate, as you say, that it's not just women, but we know that's half the population. If we can't even get women into these roles, it really tells us lots about all of the people who are being left out of the key decisions.
Absolutely, Kate. How do you think we get there? What do you think some of the important steps in getting us there are?
The most important step is that more than just those diverse groups are invested in getting there. So it's been an interesting journey over time, but in my time as a lawyer, I always did discrimination cases. And I remember how much time we talked about the business case. And, I used to think, why do we, we're not having to explain the business case of all the men being there. Like, why are we having to justify this with a financial outcome? And I know the people watching this will be saying, well, the business case language doesn't make sense for a lot of our sectors. We're not looking to make more money. We are trying to make the community better. But so I think there's a number of things. But if I think in the current moment, for example, how do we get better? I think having more diversity in leadership is important. But in the absence of that, having more voice to leadership, having better use of data that, for example, is gender disaggregated. So there's so much, in the changes we're experiencing. And we know, we look around the sectors that are immediately impacted. So the most female-dominated sectors are health and social assistance and education and training. They are on the front line. The next most female-dominated sectors are retail, trade and accommodation and food services, which have immediately been the first ones to all lose their jobs. So once you immediately look, we now see that, for example, women are going to be losing their jobs at a faster rate than men. So the projections from Grattan say young people and women will be more affected. So one way of getting there is for us to keep pushing for those different people in leadership, but also really focus on what we know, how we can make better decisions. But I am really convinced that we need more than just the people who are, not getting the opportunities to be recognising that it's an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, you've touched on issues across generations and different generational responses to what's occurring now with COVID and the impact of that first kind of discrimination case on you. One of the things that has been an emerging kind of part of the discussion throughout the particularly around I've been noticing it as part of the implementation of the Royal Commission recommendations and the transformation of the family violence sector, is thinking about the way different generations of feminists, what their approach has been, what they've prioritised over time. What are your thoughts about how we get the most productive relationships across generations, particularly in kind of addressing this space around family violence?
I think it's so important. I think anyone who's worked in family violence would know the importance of particularly women who've gone before us, just really making all the difference to where we are now. And I think that recognising that and valuing that is really important, while also recognising for our times some of those things and the way we've operated maybe need to change to meet the moment we are now and the opportunities we have now. So I think it is so important, but I know I've thought a lot about this intergenerational issue in my current role, because I always just know that I've always been a feminist, and I find this whole conversation about who will say they're a feminist and not. Actually, that's probably been a topic of discussion in my whole adult life, which I've always been a bit baffled by. And there's a few things that I just don't engage in the conversation because I think I'm not convinced it's moving us forward. But this, the use or the language about feminism is, I'm a feminist, but there's all different ways. Different people believe we can move the agenda forward in terms of advancing women's rights. And so one of my recent examples where I suddenly had this light bulb of the different changes doing the sexual harassment inquiry. So on the 5th of March, which was right before we all went home, the Attorney General tabled our 18-month inquiry on sexual harassment at work. And Minister Payne, who's the Minister for Women, co-launched it with me. And my next 6 months was meant to be talking across the country about, and in fact, across the world. I had, plans for New York and Washington about this inquiry that everyone was interested in. Just for you to know, and your audience, you'll now see me on webinars in the next few months talking about that inquiry. But in the course of doing that, what I really noticed was that sexual harassment is an issue that really peaks that difference in generations of women. So I was at Ormond College at the time of the incident that ended up in the first stone in Helengana. And I remember reading it, and I was then a practicing lawyer, and I had a very clear picture on this is sexual harassment. The college didn't handle the complaint very well. And so I understood why the women proceeded with their case. But there was a whole generation, and I still talk to them today, of women, including Helengana, who said, stop making a big fuss, put up with it. It's the least, it's the least of your worries. And these are women who fought really hard for really important developments for us. And I think at the time I was quite confused by that. I couldn't reconcile, as Virginia Trioli says, here was the women who fought really hard to get these laws put in place and then criticising us for using them. So I know then, and I know when we did the inquiry now, actually since that, which was 25 years ago to now, actually not a lot has changed on sexual harassment. So our inquiry has found that 1 in 3 Australian workers are sexually harassed, and it's really everyday so we always thought it would be better, but it isn't. And so in doing the national inquiry, I had conversations with older women and I had conversations with younger women. And if I put myself in the middle, others might put me in the older, but I'll put myself in the middle. And some of the older women I spoke to did say, I've reflected and I didn't think it was a big deal, but now I think that maybe I should have done something, because not that it affected me, but it seems to have continued sort of with impunity. Other women have said, nah, I still think you're making a fuss about nothing. And that's sort of a different generation to me. When I've spoken to younger women, and particularly I have a stepdaughter who is 23, 24, and her friends, I look at their feminism and it's a slowly dawning realisation. So this is a generation who've come through an education system that absolutely delivers for girls as well as boys. And they don't have the same union membership. They don't have the same kind of, newspaper reports about Deborah Wardley. They're not reading outrageous things in the paper. And so when I've talked to those women, I've realised I would love for us to just give young people some gender expertise, because they sort of come through, they think it's all fair, and then suddenly they don't. And I know my stepdaughter sort of says, tell me some things to read, because it's not her lived experience yet. But all of those things that we now know are the barriers are much more hidden. They're much more insidious. They're built into the gender stereotypes of what we expect men and women to do. And still that model of the man goes to work and the woman's, works part-time or casual. And we can see in COVID that that's all spilling out into the fact that women are losing their jobs at higher rates. So I do, my principle, though, is everyone has value and everyone's experience and their perspective is informed by, what they know. And I have a real growth mindset of learning from them, but also I never get frustrated by those different perspectives. I really realize that I need to listen because actually they're the least of my worries, those different perspectives. I then go into some, on that inquiry, some focus groups of just men, and wow, that is a whole different world. So you need to be able to listen and realise where people start and then start from there.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice about how to build those relationships. I think that's a really interesting point you make about the different way people's perspectives are informed, in terms of whether it's a growing realization or a very sudden realization because something happens when you've actually to some extent kind of been protected from what are those gender inequities that we're dealing with. That's a longer conversation, Kate, that I'll look forward to. My last question. This is a forum for as I said, the Family Violence Leadership Intensive alumni. So this is for people who are either already leaders or becoming leaders in the family violence space, helping with what at the moment with COVID response is incredible levels of adaptation and change and transformation and thinking about an uncertain future. And the leadership task through that is an incredibly complex one. What's your advice? What's your advice to leaders about navigating through that?
I would say, because I'm also in this same moment and looking at human rights issues and gender equality issues, we all have had to sort of put aside everything we thought we were going to do this year to do something radically different. And that I'm seeing wonderful things in people, but that leaves a lot of vulnerability, a lot of uncertainty, and some days when things are just not, the way you want them to be. And so there have been a couple of times where I know someone called me about something and was, and I just burst into tears. And I just at that point thought, I could hang up now, but actually it probably doesn't hurt. I've been really positive. I'm mostly really positive. But today, this issue just feels like it's just the one too much. The thing that I would say in terms of what I'm seeing and what I like about now is collaboration and people trusting each other more. And I think in leadership, that's really critical. So if I think from my point of view, there's a number of people who hold really interesting roles that involve gender expertise in government or federal government and around. Now, across this country, there is actually so many amazing people, including in the family violence sector. And so I know they're everywhere and they're sort of hidden little gems sometimes. But when this issue hit, there's a few that I have sort of a connection with, and we just suddenly came together. So it was, and I'll tell you who they are because they're often not realised we're there. But so obviously my role as Sex Discrimination Commissioner in the Human Rights Commission. Then there's the head of the Office for Women. There's an ambassador for gender equality that sits in DFAT. There's an ambassador for women and in STEM who is Lisa Harvey-Smith, an amazing astrophysicist, but advancing gender equality. There's the heads of Our Watch and Anne Rose who have that specialisation in family violence, and the E-Safety Commissioner, and also the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. So we're sort of all government funded. Most of us are kind of independent, but we just started coming together. And we are all doing different things, but we're talking once a week or once a fortnight and just saying, what are you doing? This is what I'm doing. And we've decided together to put together a paper for government to just cover what we think are the key gender issues, because we can see, so if I look outwards, government is doing the same thing. No one's fighting about which bit. Everyone's got to just pull together. Within government, there is amazing people doing amazing things. They're working 24/7. And really, every time I speak to someone, I just say, what can I do and what can we do that would help? So what I'm seeing is collaboration, and I'm seeing trust. I'm seeing no one's having an argument about should you do that, is your patch or not. And I'm learning so much, but I just can see, it's the difficult circumstances that's unleashing that, but I'm really excited by that. We're making different connections. We're finding different places we can contribute. And so I'd encourage all your leaders to do the same. There is lots of people out there who are trying to shift things forward, and we're all super busy, but there are different ways that we can help each other, and that's making up to a collective better, and it's also much more rewarding. So yeah, that's my reflection on what I'm learning through this crisis.
Yeah, Kate, I think that absolutely echoes what a lot of other people have been saying, and I've been experiencing. I think that making that preparedness to make connections and collaborate is absolutely magnified at the moment, and we've got to catch the moment. So yes. That's very good advice. Thank you very much for your time today, Kate.
Thank you. That was a really interesting conversation. I appreciate your doing this work.
Thanks, Kate.